Hello, everybody. Welcome into a special edition of SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Grant and Shawn McFarland. We're going to do a little special edition of Rangers Roundtable based on the fact that the Rangers are 72 games in to the schedule as we're taping this at 36 and 36, pretty close to the midway point of the season. So we want to kind of go over everything that's happened so far and everything we think will happen from this point on. So let's just start right there, fellas. What do we think about the Rangers at this point? Is this, at this point, Evan, would you have expected the Rangers to be kind of, just keeping their heads above water?
I think there's been a number of missed opportunities, and that all goes back to what's been the story of the first half of the season, which is the lack of consistent offense. The fact that they just swept the White Sox, but they went 1-2 in Chicago a month ago. There were other opportunities. They lost the series at the Athletics that they should have won. And so there were opportunities for them to make some ground early on. I think that everything about this season has been as completely unpredictable as you could possibly imagine. I would not have gone into the season thinking that the Rangers would have the third best relief ERA in the American League, that they'd have the best starting rotation ERA in the American League, or that they'd be in the bottom, that they were at the bottom of the league offensively until the last 10 days. So it's been a complete upside down first 72 games. I think the good news is that the Rangers certainly haven't been knocked out. They're right in the middle of the American League wildcard race at this point in time. But I do think that there have been some missed opportunities, and you hope that if they're getting things together now, that doesn't come back to haunt them later on.
So, Shawn, you've been out there a lot and covering the team, and we should say that Shawn's the backup Rangers beat writer for us, among the many other things he does for us so well. Shawn, you've seen the team a lot this year. What has surprised you the most, and what is the thing that, let's say from surprises, good and bad?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if the pitching consistency has been more surprising or if the offensive inconsistency has been more surprising, but I think the pitching has been, because we saw for most of last year that the offense was flawed, that the offense was not what it was in 23, and that's clearly carried over. But when you are this deep into the season, and Patrick Corbin has been one of the better starters in the American League, and Jack Leiter has been a consistent number 3, number 4 starter, or whatever you want to call him. Jacob deGrom has been their healthiest starter, and they've all been so level and so reliable. I think that's more surprising than anything else. That, and the fact that the bullpen has, for the most part, been a non-issue. They've obviously had some meltdowns, some blow-ups, some injuries, but over the whole, it hasn't been. I don't think anyone is horrified when they turn to the bullpen, which I don't think is something we could say, obviously, in 2023 and parts of last year too. It's been just getting to the bullpen with a lead, in a safe spot, hoping that the offense has done its job. That's been the biggest thing.
Let me ask you guys this, because we don't really talk about it a lot. And obviously this has been, I would say, up to this point, the best pitching performance overall, rotation and bullpen, by the Rangers team that I can remember. I've been in the market since 1985. I don't really recall a time when it's been this good. And I don't know if there's ever been a time that the Rangers rotation and bullpen has been this good. Has it, Evan?
Yeah, I think that, we've done different statistical dives to indicate that the numbers for the rotation have been historically great for the Rangers. There's been times when they had some really talented pitchers in the rotation, when they had Kevin Brown and Bobby Witt and Kenny Rogers was moving into the rotation at that point in time, and Edwin Correa. But this has been day in and day out. It's been a really consistent starting rotation. And I think, to Shawn's point, the fact that, going into the season, the storyline was, oh my God, are they going to have enough bodies to fill out the rotation because of the injuries to Jon Gray and to Cody Bradford? And so far, they've navigated that really well. I think they're in a delicate spot right now with injuries to Evaldi and Tyler Malley. They've got to navigate that a little bit until Bradford gets back. But for me, and I've been here since '97, Kevin, there's not been a time when the starting rotation has been this good and this consistent day in and day out. And the sad part about it is that while you'd love to just write about that every day, I think the offensive inconsistency, because it was expected to be so good, has just kind of overshadowed that. And I'm looking back at the Rangers' numbers offensively. And Josh Smith, who is the player of the week in the American League, among the regulars, he's got a 799 OPS, but everybody else is performing well below what should be their standards. And that's been kind of a story inside the Rangers front office is, how do you navigate when nobody's having a good year? It's usually you have one or two guys that are going really well and you've got to pick up a couple other guys, but the Rangers issue has been nobody's gone well.
Yeah, I want to talk about the offense, obviously, but I do want to stick with the pitching just for a moment longer here because, this has been the history of the Rangers is that their pitching has basically been, if not terrible, at least it was just mediocre at best, I want to get to a reason why we think this has happened. Obviously, you go out and sign Jacob deGrom, and you're just waiting for him to get healthy, and he's going to be great because he's one of the best pitchers of this generation. So that's not so hard to see. It is a little bit hard to see him be healthy all this time. And then obviously, as you wrote today, they're trying to manage his workload a little bit because at the rate he's pitching so well, and he's staying out there so long that he's going to run up his innings too high for where he's been the last several years.
Yeah, he's pitching too well. That's where the Rangers' problems are right now on the starting rotation. Is Jacob deGrom is pitching too well. And it's true.
It is crazy. And so, but other people who have come in, it's like identifying Patrick Corbin, right? So when I remember, I was at spring training when that signing was made, and I remember the talk around the room, the talk around baseball was, my gosh, what is this guy going to do for you? He's been the worst starter in baseball the last couple of years. And the Rangers had identified something they saw in the second half of last season that they thought could help him be successful. And I'm assuming that's what it is that whatever they saw that they're having him do. And this is a little different. I mean, Jack Leiter is starting to have some success now. Of course, he was a very high pick. You say he should be having success. Kumar Rocker, the same thing. He's kind of been up and down all over the place. Another high pick. He should be having some success. So some of those things are, I guess, I don't want to look like I'm giving them too much credit here, but there is a turnaround. I'm wondering, is some of it just where baseball is right now, where pitching is more dominant than it has been, historically over the last 30 years, or is it something that the Rangers are actually doing?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, look, I think Corbin's a great example of like what happens when you get a different set of eyes on someone, and what happens when different coaching staff, different analytics folks get to see a guy and say, hey, change his pitch usage, use his pitch more, something he wasn't getting in Washington maybe. And I think Leiter is an example of just kind of leaps and bounds. The pitching development has gone in this organization and some changes he made to, the way he approaches the game mentally and everything these last 2 years. Like, I think it's reflective of both. And I think it comes down to being able to identify sometimes small tweaks that can unlock a lot.
I think there's a number of components, right? I mean, you can't diminish just what a healthy Jacob deGrom does for any rotation. Then you factor in not just the performance of Nathan Evaldi, but his value inside the clubhouse and how he is almost a secondary pitching coach who's a peer for all of these guys. Thirdly, I think you and we've written some about this over the last couple of years, but the Rangers have done a great job, maybe better than anybody in baseball, at plumbing the middle to lower end of the free agent market for starting pitchers. Now, Corbin was more of a desperation sign at that point in time, but they had identified that he had moved more to the cutter, and he had some metrics that they liked with the cutter. And look, even when the signing wasn't sexy, you could understand why they went there, because they could say they'd throw him out there for 5 innings and he'd take a beating and still save your bullpen a little bit. He's just pitched really well beyond that. Malley's been a real wild card, and Jack Leiter, I think, again, there's a number of layers there. One, I thought Leiter was going to be a guy who responded really well to the major league experience he got last year, and we've seen that. Secondly, I think the composure or the composition of the new pitching staff that includes Jordan Teagues in the bullpen, who had Jack in kind of a developmental role in the minor leagues, I think that gives him another voice. I also think that Jack is, as a second-generation player and from as rich a pitching family as there is in baseball, really can vibe with the veterans, like in particular, like Eovaldi, and can learn and does learn from that. And for a while, he was basically pitching right after Eovaldi, and I think was taking a lot out of those games. So there's been you can't ever just say it's one thing, but I do think when you look at this Rangers pitching staff in the rotation, there's been a number of things, and we also can't like just overlook the fact that when it comes to game planning, and we've talked so much about coaching and messaging and all that, there's nobody better in the game at distilling a really simple game plan for starting pitchers that allows them to not think and just focus on the mitt, as well as Mike Maddox does.
Yeah, I think those are all great combinations. And so let's one more thing here about the pitching. And so that's been great so far, right? In this first half, much better than I thought it was going to be. I thought they would be decent. I didn't think they would be this good. Is it sustainable? Because we've just learned that Tyler Mahle is probably going to be out probably until September. There's ongoing issues with Nathan Eovaldi now. They're probably going to start trying to manage, Jacob deGrom's innings a little bit here to get his number down to maybe something closer to 180 if he stays healthy for the rest of the season. So can these guys, can the Cody Bradfords, can people like that step up and fill in those spots and kind of keep this thing running the way that it has been?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think that is going to be something that the Rangers have to manage. But the one thing that you can say is that they've got a pretty good starter in Cody Bradford. They expect back probably by the 4th of July, if not then by the All-Star break. And Jon Gray might be right around August 1st. So they've navigated a lot of the area where they were going to be without those two guys. There's still some dicey points there, but I think that there's the ability to not drop off a whole bunch. I do think that they've gotten to the point where they're going to have some depth when those two guys come back, and that will be important.
Well, and I think the hope too is, right, like that ideally moving forward, they will not need to rely on the starting pitching staff as much as they have these first 2 months, because ideally the offense goes from bottom 5 in baseball to average, like if you can at least get there, and then you don't need, it would still be nice, but you aren't going to be relying on a top 3 rotation to keep you at 500. If the rotation drops down to what? Top 10, above average because of injuries, because of overuse, because of all these things, but the offense can at least raise its floor a little bit. You're not going to be living and dying by, as many 2-1 games, ideally. And I think that's, as much as it is the reinforcements, like the idea that the other parts of the whole can make up for, even a small step back from the rotation.
Yeah, so let's go in now and talk about the offense, because this is 2 years in a row where it hasn't been very good. or certainly not anything like it was in 2023, which raised all kinds of questions. I think some of us, I guess I bit into it myself, that, the additions of Jake Berger and Jock Peterson was going to make a difference and give them a little more pop, and the metrics would be better. And that just hasn't happened. Peterson, of course, is out. Berger's is starting to respond a little bit. But that's, as you noted earlier, Evan, across the board here. Yeah, they're hitting a little better. But that's only because they were awful. Well, before that, they couldn't remain awful for the entire season. At the very least, you would think most of these guys are at least average hitters. And that just hasn't been the case so far. I mean, we were talking before the season about the possibility of Jake Berger hitting 40 home runs. Well, he's going to have a pretty big bounce back here in the second half to get to 40. There's nobody in this team that's going to get to 40. I'd be surprised at this point if anybody got to 30. Is that something that can be addressed internally here at the trade deadline? Or do we think that probably, as we've talked about before, they're better off adding a closer?
I still think, look, that if you and I have had this conversation on a number of occasions, but I still think that if the Rangers are going to add, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but if the Rangers are going to add, I still think it's going to need to be in the bullpen. I do think offensively we have seen some really good signs in the last couple of weeks. And here's what happens, Kevin, is you get one guy hot, like you did with Marcus Semien, and then that's one guy that pitchers have to pitch around a little bit, and so they're willing to attack somebody else, and somebody else gets pitches to hit, and then they get hot. And that's what you've seen happen with Josh Smith, and now with a healthy Evan Carter. And so all of a sudden, now you've got a lot more hot spots in the lineup that pitchers have to be careful with, and it just allows for more guys to start to produce. Will this keep up all year? Look, I don't think Corey Seager is going to OPS under 700. I don't think that I do think that Jake Berger has been on a steady incline since he's come back from the IL. I do think that Wyatt Langford is, even though he currently, has a 755 OPS, which is good on this team, has been in something of a rough stretch lately. And I think that will get ironed out. And I don't think this offense is going to be what we said it would during spring training, but I think this offense is going to be significantly better.
What do you think, Shawn?
I agree with Evan, especially in terms of getting multiple guys hot. Yeah, I think that's been the most shocking thing. And I think Evan alluded to this earlier too, is like there'd be stretches where it'd be like just one guy was hitting and the other 8 just weren't. And it was incredibly ugly and hard to watch. But I think this past week in Minnesota, they had those 2 double-digit win games. I think you saw what they wanted to see all season, which is like that consistent pass the baton approach. They were taking smart at bats. They were walking. You had a few guys hot, like Marcus was hot, and Josh Smith was hitting better. And I think that's what it takes, is just like get a few guys hot. I think they believe the hitting is contagious. I think if we look at 23, it clearly was. So I think it takes getting a few guys hot, and it changes, I think, the mood of things, the way they're pitched to, and I think the way this lineup can work.
I believe all of that, but it is still difficult at times. In that series against the White Sox, they made that harder than it had to be to win those games. You relied on the incompetence of the White Sox in key moments late in those games. And I'm thinking in particular about the one game where I guess it was the 8th inning. They had runners at second and third, no outs, and they got a run in because of a wild pitch, but 3 straight strikeouts.
And then they scored the go-ahead run on a throwing error on what should have been a routine ground ball. Yeah. This offense is still inconsistent, Kevin. It is. But I do think the idea that they're going to score 5 runs every night, I think that's what fans are waiting to see. That you're not going to do that every night either.
No, you're not, and that's I guess the thing they're trying to get used to is that how much of this is just adjustments that teams have made on the Rangers since 2023. How much of it was just guys having career years and everything synced up, and everybody knows. Look, anytime you win a World Series, that means you were lucky. That you either didn't have a lot of injuries or guys had career years and things like that happen. You have to have a certain amount of luck involved in all of that. And I think, that I thought it was going to help a little bit with Kyle Higashioka coming in and giving, Jonah Heim some time off, and that would help him at catcher. I think it has helped him over last year, but still he's not gotten back to the level that he was in 2023 either.
I think the farther we get out from all of this, it becomes that much more clear that for 23, the guys who had career years were Adolis Garcia, Jonah Heim, and Leody Taveras. And Taveras has now just been designated for assignment by Seattle, the second time he's been DFA'd this year. And I think it's clear that Garcia and Heim had career seasons that year. And Bruce Bochy is always very, very upfront about this, that to win a World Series, you've got to have one or two guys have career years. Well, maybe what the Rangers are having is they're having that on the pitching side as opposed to the offensive side. I don't know if that'll carry you to World Series, but that's where the above expectation performances appear to be.
Well, but you have to also get something from Corey Seager now at this point, right? And you would expect that. I mean, that's the thing to me. He has to drive this team, the offense. If Jacob deGrom is carrying the rotation, and the other guys are obviously pitching well too, but as you pointed out, he is, the guy who's going to be a Cy Young candidate here if he keeps this up and stays healthy. And you expect that from him. When Jacob deGrom is healthy, he's good. There's never been anything else that basically in the last, 8 or 9 years of his career. So, and I think we think the same thing about Seager, don't we? Don't we, Shawn? When you expect here at some point that Seager is going to start getting hot? Because I'm looking at his heat map the other day, and anything right down the middle, he was hitting like 429, and everything else around his heat map was like low 200s or in the 100s. And I got to think at some point he's going to start hitting something other than pitches right down the middle of the plate.
Yeah, I mean, to paraphrase something Bruce Bochy says all the time, is like he's too good not to. I asked Boch in Minnesota something about Corey's little slump, and he laughed in my face. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not even thinking about it. It'll be fine." I think that's where I think the general consensus is on Corey. But also, I think what's interesting is historically when he has come back from injuries, there hasn't been this much of a
lag time.
He's usually pretty back to it pretty quick. But to your point, I think it's safe to say that because of how diligent he is as a hitter, how good he is as a hitter, he will turn this around. And then your hope is that Semien, who's now hitting behind him, stays hot, that Smith and Langford, who are hitting in front of him, continue to be the team's two best hitters. And then you give that top four, and you have four of those guys who are at least not slumping. Whether or not they're all going to be American League Player of the Week each week is a different story. But if they're all at least not in a horrible funk, I think that changes the complete outlook of what this offense can do, at least on a consistent basis.
And let me ask you this about with what's happening here. And obviously, at some position, you are just what you are. I mean,
I just want to interject one thing. I'm just looking at the Rangers again, and does anything sum this team up better than the fact Marcus Semien was the leadoff man, then he was the number 5 hitter, then he was the number 9 hitter, and now he's the cleanup guy. I mean, they have tried everything.
Well, they're going to try everything, and that's what, and frankly, that's the way it should be. I think, that's what Bruce Bochy has said all along. If you're hitting, you're going to be up the top of the lineup. But what I was going to say is that, so if Josh Jung is healthy, he's at third, Corey Seager's at short, Marcus Semien's at second, Jake Berger's playing first, maybe a little bit of Josh Smith there, and then you got the two catchers. So anything that's going to change, basically, is going to be in the outfield. And so going forward here in the second half, what do y'all see the composition of that outfield being? And Shawn, we'll start with you on that.
I think as it stands now, it's going to be Langford left, Carter in center, and Garcia in right. I think Garcia, as we saw at Free CO, is the most prone to lose that role. But but he's been incredibly good at defense this year in right field. It's night and day from last year, and a big part of that is because he's got his legs back. And the last week or so, he has been hitting better. It looks like he's responded well to the 5 days off he was given. But I think they like that alignment. They like what that does defensively. And Carter, of course, was hitting very well before he hurt his wrist. Langford, probably on the whole, has been their most consistent hitter. I think that's the tree you run with, and you mix in Sam Haggerty against lefties. You have Osuna there, as kind of a change-up too. But I think on a night-to-night basis, like that's the three we're going to see until they are given another serious reason to make that change, which they've proven they will if they need to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the offense, the outfield alignment is probably pretty much set for the time being. Haggerty's been hot by Ranger standards, and I think he will continue to be in the mix, particularly against some right-handed pitchers in place of Garcia. But I also think that in all likelihood, here in the not too distant future, Osuna's probably headed back to the minor leagues. He's not getting at bats. He's fallen into a long 0 for. I think he's 0 for his last 15. Wouldn't surprise me if they brought Dustin Harris back up just to have him more as a bench player, or that might be a spot that it would eventually be filled by Jock Peterson when he's healthy. He won't play the outfield, but he gives him a bat. I just do wonder, maybe they'll go out and see if there's, a fringe extra outfielder that they could add if they need to. That's, kind of an extra piece kind of at the deadline.
So what do they do with Jock Peterson when he comes back? If Jock doesn't bounce back here and start to show a little bit of what he has over the last couple of years and in his splits,
well, he won't play. I mean, it's that simple. I think that we've reached a stage of the season where it's all meritocracy. You're going to have to perform to play. He'll get an opportunity, but I don't know that if he doesn't come back out and seize it quickly, he's going to be on the bench.
So, Shawn, who's going to be your DH in the second half?
That's a great question. Look, I thought Jake Berger hit well there, but I think his defense at first has been too good to take him off there full time. I think if Peterson is not your everyday DH, I think it will be a rotating cast. I think they'd like to give, it's a good chance to give Corey some more days off his seat. You put Josh Jung there, you put Berger there every now and then, you put Smith there. I think that is how they will do it. I think that gives them chances to get Josh Smith in the field more often too, if you're moving guys into that DH role. But yeah, I mean, if Jock's not going to be there every day, I don't think they're going to have an everyday DH whose sole position is to be the DH.
Is that really a bad thing, Evan, at this point? I mean, obviously you wanted Jock Peterson to add something. He was supposed to add something to the clubhouse and also obviously on the field. But they haven't really figured out a way to get Josh Smith, playing time other than when somebody's hurt. And so,
well, I think that, you could look at, if we're talking about meritocracy right now, Josh Jung has fallen into a deep slump here since Memorial Day. I think he's, since May 30th, he's hitting 143. And so you could, if everybody's healthy, you could end up seeing a situation where Josh Smith plays third base against basically every right-hander. And then you'd have another lefty and Peterson as your DH. So you could go kind of heavy that way and have Jung on the bench in case they bring in a lefty. But if they're healthy, this Rangers team has some versatility to it. And that was supposed to help them cover on for injuries. But it may end up having to cover them for lack of performance for some guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that these are the things that are concerning to me. And you just mentioned Josh Jung. Here was a guy that when he was healthy, and of course that was always the issue with him, right? He just couldn't stay healthy. And I don't think that then he was injury prone. When you're getting hit by pitches and breaking stuff, that's not your fault. But I think we expected him to play at close to an all-star level. I mean, he established that early on. And what we're seeing right now is not. And I would count him as one of the biggest disappointments of the season, at least offensively, wouldn't you?
I mean, listen, one of the things you run into with Josh Jung is that he's streaky, and he's not he doesn't walk as much as you'd like to see him walk. And I do think that as this goes on, I have questions about how well Josh Smith will hold up in the second half of a season as an everyday player. His numbers after the All-Star break the last 2 years when he's played regularly have really fallen off. And so I think in an ideal situation, he'd be a 400 to 450 at bat guy. But if he's one of your best bats right now, you're going to run that out there. And if that means that Josh Jung ends up losing playing time down the road, then that's the way the Rangers are going to go. I mean, it's as much as I believe in Josh Jung and as much as I think he can be a pretty special player, it's going to come down to performance and not belief at that point.
Yeah, no question about that. All right, we're going to have to get close to wrapping this up here in our special Rangers podcast edition. But I do want to ask about that closer role. So I do think that is the easiest thing you can add is a special piece in the bullpen. What do you think is more likely, though, at this point? Is that somebody that they acquire, or does Jon Gray end up in a role like that?
I think it's probably more likely they'd acquire a closer than put Jon Gray into that role. And look, I am since 2023, I've been a huge proponent of Jon Gray would do great in the bullpen, just running fastballs and sliders past guys. I don't know if closer is the perfect role for that. I don't know what that would look like if they did decide to put him into the bullpen in some role. But I think if they are going to make a significant change at closer, if it's not going to be Robert Garcia or Luke Jackson, whoever you want to throw out there, it would probably be an external addition, I think.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that if this team needs to go out and get somebody, I think you'd like to go out and get somebody who fits right into a role. This bullpen has done a great job of not worrying about roles, and I think that's great from the fifth inning through the eighth. But I do think you'd like to have a guy that you count on for the ninth inning every night. And here's the other part of this. Look, I think with situations that have arisen and with Chris Martin now basically turning 39, it's hard right now. It's hard to even count on him going back-to-back days. So that adds another X factor, and he's one of your leverage arms. So I'd really like to have some reliability in the ninth inning. And that way, if Martin's not available, then maybe Jackson's your eighth inning guy. If Martin is available, then he's your eighth inning guy. But that's kind of what I think the approach here needs to be is, in an ideal situation, Robert Garcia would be your left-handed setup guy, and Chris Martin would be your right-handed setup guy, and then you'd have a lockdown closer to close things out. I don't rule out the possibility of Jon Gray going there. I think because Chris Jung is very open to looking at creative solutions, I think that works towards the possibility of Jon Gray ending up in a closer role, but I don't think the Rangers would bring him back and immediately say, okay, Jon Gray is going to close games. I think he would come back and pitch in some leverage situations, and that might evolve. And I don't know if John's not going to be back until the end of July, I don't know if you can wait that long or if you've got to go out and get somebody and let the Jon Gray thing kind of evolve as it does.
Yeah, I could see him. Yeah, I don't expect them that they would say, no, you're going to be our closer now either. I think probably unless they add someone who specifically is targeted for that role as a closer, that they're just going to mix and match. And I would think they would do that going to the playoffs too. And certainly at the very least, Greg gives you somebody with tremendous stuff. They don't have anybody out there that right now with tremendous stuff, and that's,
they don't have any. Yeah, they don't have anybody that touches 99 or 100 in the bullpen.
No, and so that's the attraction, right, of Gray, is that he at least gives you that. And you know, if you watch him pitched over the years, he just seems better suited with his stuff to be a closer than he is as a starter. I mean, I think it's remarkable he's gotten as far as he has in his career with basically 2 pitches. So he's probably better suited for that. And I don't know if he thinks that or not. And most starters don't want to go back there and do that kind of thing.
Well, I talked to him the other day, and whether he was just, for my edification or whether he really believes it, he did say, look, he's made peace with the idea that he could come back in a relief role. So he's entertained it, and he dealt with the chatter about it this spring, and he dealt with it as a reliever in the 2023 playoff run. So I don't think it's certainly out of the realm of possibilities for him, and I think he's in a good headspace where that's concerned.
All right, before we get out of here, let's go around here. So what happens? I'm going to ask each of you. We're all going to say, do the Rangers make the playoffs? If they make the playoffs, how far can they go? We'll start with you, Shawn.
I think no. I think look, what the offense did, or rather didn't do, the first third of the season. Like I said this before, like teams that are that bad offensively for that long of a time don't magically get better. I think this team can get better offensively, but I think we're seeing that coincide with maybe the best pitching staff in baseball starting to decline a little bit. I just think there are too many, like the last half hour, we've pretty much exclusively talked about what's wrong. And I think there are too many things that are wrong, or at least have question marks, to confidently say that they can, over these next 90 or so games, figure it out.
Evan?
I'm, as you know, Kevin, from your long association with me, I am the picture of optimism.
Yes.
So I am going to say that the Rangers will make the playoffs, because I still don't know that I believe in the Astros. And I think that despite Cal Raleigh having an MVP caliber season, the Mariners are basically hanging around 500 too. So I do think that somehow this team makes the playoffs. But I think that whenever they run into Detroit or the Yankees, that is where their season will end. Now, whether that's at the ALCS or before, I don't know. But I do think this team will make the playoffs. And look, if they do get everybody back, and if you are going into the playoffs with Jacob deGrom and Nathan Eovaldi as your 1-2, man, anything can happen.
Yeah, that's the thing for me with this team. Their pitching is really set up for the playoffs, right? When you're going to a short rotation, this team can do that. That is the maddening part about this season, is that they just have to get there, and getting there to the playoffs is going to be such the hard part for the Rangers, because they've just not been able to mount any kind of thing offensively, as we've said over and over and over again. It's not just the fact they're not hitting; it's what you alluded to earlier. They're not taking walks either. It's like they're just not smart at bats. It's like, surely you figure out some way to get on base. Surely just put the bat on the ball here, just to move this guy over. Just play simple baseball here, and they seem incapable of that at times. So I'm going to go with Shawn on this one. I don't think they're going to be able to pull this out here and make the playoffs. I just think that at some point the pitching is going to start to falter some. It's just pitching at such an incredible level, and they've just been a 500 team with the best pitching staff in baseball. So that is really a difficult thing to sustain. So that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We hope you enjoyed this special edition, the Rangers edition of the podcast. We'll be back to a regular podcast schedule soon. We'll be talking about what happens when new people come to town, maybe some of these other teams around here. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.